Hello, students, and welcome back to our next video in seed plants. Now, I know I kept you in suspense yesterday, and I'm wondering how many of you got the answer correct. Do you remember where I left you off yesterday? With that really big flower. Yes. I'm just curious, how many of you thought, by a show of hands, if you can, how many of you thought that that was a monocot? How many of you thought it was a dicot? Well, here's the truth, okay? If you count up all of the petals, you should have gotten the number 20. The number 20. So does that make any of you change your mind as to whether it is a monocot or a dicot? Because the correct answer is a dicot. So the seeds from this beautiful plant have two cotyledons because 20 is a multiple of both 4 and 5. 4 times 5 equals 20. So let's move on now to diving in a little bit more in depth, if you will, into the structure of these beautiful seed plants. So let's begin with the reproductive structures, starting with the ovule. The ovule. Now you can see this diagram here shows the various parts, and we're going to go over all of these parts one at a time. But here is the ovule right here. So what is the ovule? Well, in your notes, it is the female structure containing egg cells. The ovule is the female structure containing egg cells. And by the way, any organism, whether it is a plant or an animal or a human, if they reproduce sexually, which we do, then there is an ovule, basically, a female structure that contains the egg cells. The egg cells are the female component of sexual reproduction. And we talked a little bit about that in the last unit when we talked about meiosis, if you recall. All right, so let's move on to the next term here, which is pollen. Now, how many of you have allergies? Do any of you have hay fever or allergies that exist in the spring when the flowers and the trees and the grasses are all out in bloom and, cars can get covered in that yellow powdery dust and it wreaks havoc on your nose and you suffer from rhinitis? Rhinitis? What is rhinitis? Rhinitis is a runny nose. Any word that ends in itis, itis, is an inflammation of something like appendicitis, tonsillitis, rhinitis, and rhino refers to nose. Think about a rhinoceros. What are they known for? Their nose is a distinctive feature. So if you suffer from rhinitis, you're suffering from, an inflammation in the inside of your nose, and it causes a runny nose. But some people get rhinitis if they have an allergy to pollen. I'm sure you've heard of that. Maybe some of you are allergic to pollen. So what is pollen in the first place? Well, as you can see, pollen is the male structure of a plant which contains sperm cells. Sperm cells. Now, notice what's written in parentheses, and you should never ignore what's written in parentheses in your notes. Write it down as well as you are looking at the diagram. You see, pollen oftentimes will have a structure containing spikes on its surface. Why might that be? Well, have you ever played with Velcro balls? If you have, if you've ever seen Velcro, you know Velcro has tiny little hooks on it, almost like this image of pollen does. And Velcro sticks together on a fabric, or Velcro balls with Velcro on them. If you throw them at a like a felt board of some kind, they'll stick on the felt board because those little spikes adhere or attach themselves to the fabric. So why do you think pollen might have these little spikes on their surface? Maybe to stick to something, and we'll get to that in a little while. But this is one reason, the structure of pollen is one reason why there are so many people that are allergic to them. They irritate the inside of your nose. I mean, if you look up inside your nose, I don't know, can you see upside my nose? No, you really don't want to do that anyway. But if you were to look inside your nose and illuminate it, there's a lot of, it looks red up there. There's a lot of blood vessels. It's a very sensitive area. And if you get something with spikes on it, landing on that very sensitive tissue inside your nose, it may cause an irritation. So much so in some folks that it will cause an allergic reaction. You start sneezing and sweating, your eyes tear, your nose runs. If you suffer from allergies, you know what I'm talking about, right? But pollen has that particular shape for very good reasons. And it's called pollination. Check out this picture of a bumblebee. It's a close-up shot. Actually, there's a honeybee. And look at all of the yellow spheres covering this little honeybee. Why? Well, check it out. The honeybee, and by the way, I love honey. And in fact, I have honey, fresh local honey, every day. I drizzle a little local honey on my waffles or pancakes instead of syrup every morning. And I've heard it said, and I think there's some truth to it, local honey especially helps you if you suffer from allergies, because you get a little dose of local pollen in your body, and your body's immune system can build up a little resistance to it. So if you suffer from allergies, maybe get your hands on some local honey and do a little experiment. Maybe it'll help this coming spring. But check out our little honeybee as it goes around from flower to flower to collect nectar that it will transform chemically into honey. It's also collecting something else inadvertently. All of this pollen. They're like itty bitty little Velcro balls that are sticking to the fur on the honeybee. Other insects and animals too, for that matter, but here's a picture of the honeybee. And if you've ever watched a honeybee, you know they go from flower to flower to flower, hundreds of flowers every day as they are collecting the nectar to go back to their hive to make some honey for me to eat, because honey is just so yummy. I just love it. But as they do so, they're carrying all of this pollen. Think about it. The bees and the birds and the bees, so to speak, are taking this pollen from one flower to another, and they are pollinating the flower. Remember, the pollen are sperm cells. They're filled with sperm cells. And the ovule, uh, containing the egg cell, is on the flowers that they are visiting. So the honeybees or the birds or whatever organism might be traveling from one flower to another, like butterflies. They are carrying the pollen with them. So they are essentially involved in the pollination of plants. In fact, for a few years now, there has been an enormous concern in our country about the honeybee population. You see, the bee population has been affected in the last few years with some unknown condition, and as a result, the population of honeybees has dramatically declined. Now, you might say to yourself, especially if you're allergic to bee stings, like, well, that's good, right? I don't have to worry about getting stung by a bee. Well, not so good when you think of the role of the honeybee in the larger ecosystem on planet Earth. They play a significant role in pollinating many of our crop foods, the foods that we rely on to eat and to sustain ourselves on. And if you get rid of one of the major pollinators, that ain't a good thing if you want to eat, because without these important critters, we wouldn't have the important food that we need to survive. So think about that. Think about that. Anyway, let's now transition and talk to different type or talk we're not going to talk to the plants, although that's not a bad thing. Have any of you ever heard that it's a good thing to talk to plants, and that if you talk to a plant, the plant will grow better? There is some truth to that, by the way. You can talk or sing to plants and they will grow better, not because they hear you or they receive your affection in any way, but because when you talk or sing, you're breathing out carbon dioxide gas, and plants dig it, man. They dig that CO2. Yeah. Then, so if you talk or sing to your plant, they're going to receive more CO2, and in return, they'll give you more O2. They'll give you more oxygen. So it's copacetic, dude. Yeah. You sing to them, and they'll breathe on you. All right, so let's talk now about two types of plants in terms of the type of seeds that they produce. Not monocots and dicots, we talked about those yesterday. What we're talking about are gymnosperms and angiosperms. What? Those are big words. What you talking about, Mr. Skirps? Well, let's just take it one step at a time, okay? Gymnosperms. Here's a picture, a diagram of a typical gymnosperm and how the seeds in a typical gymnosperm go through a cycle in order to produce the seeds and flourish and grow. So let's talk a little bit about gymnosperms in greater detail. The word gym probably sounds familiar to you because the word gym is somewhere you go for phys ed. Yeah, you go to the gymnasium. Well, the prefix gym has an interesting etymology or word origin to it. You see, back in ancient Greece, there were spas called gyms, and they were only intended for the elite males of society, and they would all go and gather daily at the gym. And in the ancient Greek gyms, there's a reason why they called them gyms, and it is because the Greek word gym means naked. That's right. Yeah, the dudes in town would all gather together in the nude to discuss the goings on of the day, and perhaps other things too, but I'd rather not even know what they might have been discussing. But gym means naked. That's where we get the word gymnasium from. Now, don't take that too literally. So the next time you have phys ed class, do not go dressed appropriately, if you know what I mean. Okay? There is certain appropriate attire that you should wear for gym class today, unlike the birthday suit of years ago. So, back to this word gymnosperm. Well, the word sperm, again, going back to the ancient Greek, sperm means seed. So the word gymnosperm literally means naked seed. Now, that doesn't mean that gymnosperms are running around in the buff. It means that the seeds of gymnosperms are not covered by an ovary. And we'll discuss the significance of that in a little while. But consider that. Gymnosperm means naked seed, which means they are not covered or clothed by an ovary. And look at that picture there, because that is a significant picture. It is a picture of a cone, which is location of the reproductive structure of gymnosperms. Gymnosperms have cones. An example of a gymnosperm is a pine tree. Pine trees, spruce trees, hemlock trees, fir trees, trees that you might see growing in a Christmas tree farm. Those are all examples of gymnosperms. And what I'd like you to do in your notes is circle the word gymnosperm, circle the word gymnosperm, and circle the word cones. Circle those two words and draw a line between the two, so that when you are studying your notes for this week's quiz, you'll key in on the fact that gymnosperms produce cones. Now, a little story here about gymnosperms. I live in the state of New Jersey, and there are lots of unique environments in our wonderful, diverse state. One of those environments is a national preserve known as, or national reserve known as the Pinelands. And in the Pinelands, which encompasses over 1 million acres of forest land in southern New Jersey, and I know when most people think of New Jersey, they think of big cities. And yes, we've got big cities from Newark to Camden and along the turnpike. But there are other places in New Jersey that are wilderness, like the Pinelands. And what's unique about the Pinelands that I want to share with you is the type of gymnosperm that grows there. The type of pine tree that grows in the Pinelands is a genus and species called Pinus rigidus. And Pinus rigidus, this pitch pine tree, is dependent on something in order for the seeds to germinate. It is dependent upon periodic forest fires. Yeah, fires are a natural part of the Pinelands ecosystem. Why? Well, these pine cones in the Pinelands require a very high temperature in order for them to expose their naked seeds so that they can germinate. Without those hot temperatures, the seeds can't germinate and baby pine trees can't grow. And so forest fires are actually an essential part of the environment in the Pinelands in the state of New Jersey. And so it's not uncommon. Every year there's a forest fire that breaks out, whether by, many of them are caused by natural causes, by lightning, let's say. But unfortunately, humans do cause forest fires as well, and that can create problems for humans. But it is, in a way, a rebirth for the pineland forest. If the pine trees did not germinate because of the periodic forest fires, then there would be no pinelands. It would develop into a forest of oak trees. Again, that's a a story for another day, but an interesting connection to gymnosperms, which brings us to the next type of sperm called angiosperms. Now, you can probably guess that angiosperms are different than gymnosperms, and you're exactly correct. The suffix sperm, again, refers to seed. But what does angio refer to? Well, angio refers to a vessel. Angiosperms, which are, by the way, the most prevalent type of plants on planet Earth at this point in our history, angiosperms have seeds that are contained in a vessel. And that vessel is called an ovary. And we can see in the image here, here's the seed, and here's the seed, and here's the ovary around the seed. In a gymnosperm, no ovary. In an angiosperm, an ovary, an outer covering of protection, which actually develops into something which we'll get to in a little while, which is one reason why I like angiosperms so much. But the location of the reproductive structure in angiosperms are the flowers. Flowers are the location of the reproductive structures in angiosperms. And we also call angiosperms flowering plants for good reason, because they're the ones that produce flowers. Now, in your notes, once again, I'd like you to circle the word angiosperms and circle the word flowers. And then draw a line between the two words so that when you are studying your notes, again, it'll draw your attention to the fact that angiosperms produce flowers, as opposed to gymnosperms, which produce cones. That way you'll be studying the difference between the two, gymnosperms and angiosperms. Okay? So, make sure you've got that covered in your notes. And I think we're going to call it quits for the day today, because I have some other things for you to do in Google Classroom for today. And we will come back tomorrow to finish our notes. So until tomorrow, I'll say bye-bye.